Welcome to Growing in Grace, a weekly program featuring informal conversation to help with growth in understanding the gospel and to live in the freedom that comes through Jesus Christ. And now, here's the hosts of Growing in Grace, Mike Kapler and Joel Berizicki.
Here we are for another program of Growing in Grace. I'm Mike Kapler, the Breeze Man, Joel Berizicki, with me, as is always the case, and has been the case for the past 4 years. And I know that there's a lot to get into here, Joel. We've had some hot programs here lately, and we don't want to spend too much time chit-chatting, but I did want to mention that I really appreciated the friendship connections that I've made through Facebook over the last couple of months, because I've only been on for a couple of months, but some great Grace friends out there that I'm getting to know a little bit better. And if you're listening to this program and you're on Facebook, be sure to invite us onto your friends list. The easiest way to find our names, I guess, is to go to graceroots.org. Joel's website there has all the archived Growing in Grace programs as well, and you can look us up.
Yeah, the Grace Roots website is something that I haven't done a whole lot with over the last few years, but yeah, I've found it's just a great way to say, hey, if you want to find out about, me and Cap and the Growing in Grace program and, Facebook and all that, and there's a new online community that's called Grace Roots that you can be a part of. It's all there on the homepage at graceroots.org. Hey, yeah, we've been talking about the law. And Cap, I've been loving these conversations we've been having for the last few weeks. This is kind of, it's just fun territory for me to explore, and for you, I know, as well, because when we get to talking about this, we look in the Bible, and you and I and a lot of other people who really focus on the grace of God, we bring out some things that are somewhat controversial in the church as a whole. But really, it's right there in the Bible. I mean, we're sitting here reading, last few weeks we've read some stuff out of Romans, we've read some stuff out of 2 Corinthians and Colossians, and we're going to look into Galatians a little bit this week, and this stuff is right there. I mean, it's right there in the Bible. You would think that even if we would just read some of these Bible verses, you'd have some church people going, no way, that's not in the Bible. But it's right there. And it's fun for me to kind of bring some of these things into light, because I think it brings a lot of freedom into people's lives. And we'll say right from the start here that the law does not bring freedom. You can listen to some of our past programs, and you'll see how we get into all that and how the law really brought bondage. It brought condemnation. We'll talk a little bit more about that this week. Freedom in the Christian life comes not from law, but from faith. And we're looking here in Galatians right now. I see Galatians 3:11 picking up in the middle of something here, but really Paul's getting to a point here. He says, but that no one is justified by the law in the sight of God is evident. He says, for the just shall live by faith. And he's quoting from the Old Testament there, the Old Testament that was looking ahead, that was looking to really how it is that just people live, that righteous people live. We live by faith, not by law. Because in fact, he says, the law is not of faith, but the man who does them shall live by them. So if you're going to live by the law, you pretty much got to keep the whole thing. But if you're going to live by the true righteousness that's from God, it's really a life of faith, and it can't be law. You can't mix the two.
That's right, and I love this because, for years I always thought that fear and faith were opposites, and really, when you look at the context of the gospel the way we should through the eyes of grace, what you'll find is that the law, or works, another word for law can be works in some cases, the law and faith are opposites. And I love what Paul goes on to say here. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. What a drag to be given a law that you couldn't keep. It demanded perfection but couldn't provide it. What a curse that is. But Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree, that the blessing of Abraham might come upon the Gentiles in Christ Jesus, that we might receive the promise, remember that word, the promise of the Spirit through faith, not through the law. Paul says a lot of other stuff, but we're going to have to skip ahead here, Joel, a little bit further into Galatians chapter 4, because the beauty of Galatians is you and I could probably sit here and just read it from verse to verse because it does flow so beautifully along this same subject line. But picking up on where we just left off, we're going to talk about something I think we mentioned on our last program, and then we ran out of time, and that's Galatians chapter 4, starting with verse 21. Paul says, "Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham," whom we just talked about, Abraham had 2 sons, the one by the bondwoman, whose name was Hagar, by the way, and the other by a free woman. Of course, that was Sarah. But he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and he of the free woman through promise, which things are symbolic. For there are 2 covenants. We know that, the old and the new. The one covenant from Mount Sinai, remember Mount Sinai, the one from Mount Sinai, which gives birth to bondage. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children. Paul goes on to say a couple of other things here to wrap up the chapter. He says, "Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, the child of promise, we are children of promise. We are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free." To summarize this, Joel, and then I'll let you jump in. The law, the commandments bring bondage. That's powerful stuff.
That is really powerful stuff, because it's something that like I was saying, you just don't hear that in the church. And in fact, when you do bring it up, and I think even sometimes if you do present people with these actual verses, I think a lot of people still stand in disbelief, because for so many people, I think Christians have looked at the law as part of the Christian life, because, hey, it's in the Bible, the law's in the Bible, and as Christians, we follow the Bible, so we're supposed to follow the law, and not really realizing the true purpose of the law and what the law really does. It really does bring bondage. And, we're talking here about the bondwoman and the free woman. And in talking about the bondwoman, we're not talking about, Roger Moore and Sean Connery. And all the James Bond movies and the Bond women that they had. Nothing like that. No Halle Berry here. Nothing like that. But I'm sorry, but people might have heard that before, but I just had to bring it up.
Oh, stop amusing yourself.
I should, because I'm probably the only one having fun with that. But the bondwoman, the real one he's talking about here, Hagar. And the free woman was Sarah. And there's such a big difference here. The bondwoman, you remember the story about Abraham. God made the promise to Abraham that his descendants would be, as numerous as the stars. And Abraham's an old man at that time, and he's thinking, no way could this happen. But yet the Bible does say that Abraham did, in the end, he did believe God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. So God did make a promise to Abraham. Abraham believed it, and it's important to know that because Abraham believed, that was what was credited to him as righteousness. And then Sarah was actually Abraham's wife, and some years passed. This promise was made to Abraham and to Sarah, and some years went by, and the promise, it didn't seem like God was fulfilling his promise. And so after a few years, Abraham and Sarah got together and said, you know what, I just don't think this thing's happening. We're old people. God hasn't produced the child that he said he would produce. How about, and Sarah suggested to Abraham, how about you go in with my bondwoman Hagar? And so Abraham and Hagar got together and produced a child, which was a child of the flesh. And that one, it turned out, of course, was not the child that God had promised. And then eventually God did fulfill his promise. It's not like he was never going to do it. He had it planned all along. And then the one that came through the free woman, the one that came through Sarah, is the one that God had promised. And so that's a little bit of the history there. But the main thing here is that when we are not walking in faith, but rather are walking according to the law, we're walking in bondage. And when we're walking in faith, and not by law, we're walking according to the promise. We're walking according to this covenant that came from the free woman, not the covenant that came from bondage. And so that's so important for us to know here in our lives in Christ.
And when we talk about the law, some people may think of different things. Understand that there were over 600 laws under the old covenant, the Jewish covenant that God had set up with them. Over 600. I know we think about Charlton Heston and the Ten Commandments. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. But understand that there was different kinds of laws for different kinds of things. And they were tedious laws. I mean, they were tough to follow. First of all, let's divide them up into three groups. You had your sacrificial laws with animal sacrifices and ceremonial sacrifices with animals. Sacrificial laws. You also had dietary laws, being careful about which foods you ate and when you ate them and not to eat and so on. And then you had the moral laws, of which the Ten Commandments were a part of that. Now, Joel, in the church world today, by and large, there are a few exceptions, but by and large, in the church world today, I don't know of too many animal sacrifices taking place. I don't know, when it comes to the dietary laws, of very many people who actually follow the Jewish laws of dietary rules and ways of doing things. Very few people are actually living truly by the way that they used to have to do it under the Old Covenant. But somehow when we get to the moral laws, that's where people start getting just a little bit hotter under the collar. Because here's the interesting thing, though, about all this. Because, you know, you and I could be going to church this week, and they have one of those potlucks or maybe even a barbecue out at the park, and have pork sandwiches, and not too many people are going to complain about that. And not too many people are going to complain that we aren't sacrificing animals in church on Sunday. But there are some issues that people have when you and I sit here and say that the Ten Commandments no longer apply to us who are in Christ. Yet, what Paul talked about here in Galatians, the law and the commandments bringing bondage, out of all those laws, out of all over 600 laws and the ones we just talked about, Paul was referring to the law given on Mount Sinai. The Ten Commandments were given on Mount Sinai. I just find that interesting that out of all the laws, the one set of laws that Paul was referring to were the ones given on Mount Sinai. Joel, the Ten Commandments.
Yep. Yeah, it's true, because I hear people say that, you know, like you say, we'll have our pork and beans and we're not out there sacrificing animals in church or anything like that. And everyone says, well, you see, we're not under those laws anymore. But the Ten Commandments, those are the laws that we need to follow. We're Christians, and God has put His Spirit in us, and we're supposed to follow the Ten Commandments. But you're so correct here in pointing this out, because, again, as we look here, Paul specifically mentions the covenant that was from Mount Sinai. And as you know, Abraham, getting my guys mixed up here, talking about James Bond and Charlton Heston. Now I'm getting Abraham and Moses mixed up, but Moses went up there and he got the Ten Commandments written by God's finger up there in Mount Sinai. Those 10 Commandments is what Paul is saying here, that is the opposite of faith. So if we're going to live a life of faith, we've got to live a life that is not including the law anymore.
Yeah, the commandments gave birth to bondage. That's what Paul said.
Yep, indeed, Cap. Bondage. That's what the law is all about. And it kind of occurs to me that we didn't really get into the things that we were planning on getting into. We want to get into, and we'll do this in the next program, if the life of a person in Christ isn't about the law, and if the law really is bondage, what is the motive of good works and of righteous living and everything like that in the Christian life? We'll get focused on that next week, so stay tuned for that next week on our Growing in Grace program.
You've been listening to Growing in Grace with Mike Kapler and Joel Beruzacki, a weekly program featuring informal conversation to help with growth in understanding the gospel and to live in the freedom that comes through Jesus Christ.